Hi there, this is Alex, and let's talk about one of my favorite things, video game weaponry, this time in Mortal Shell. I'm going to be showcasing every weapon class in the game, where you can find them, their core movesets, some of their best combos, their special abilities, and the pros and cons of each, to help you pin down which one fits your playstyle best so you can focus on upgrading that one from the start. Without any further explanation, let's just get right into it. First off, the wide-arcing Smoldering Mace. Looking at the Smoldering Mace's moveset, huge wide-hitting angles on its really solid light attacks, and very slow but long-reaching heavy attacks that often stagger enemies if you manage to time them correctly. The dash attack is particularly good because of how quickly it comes out and its wide-sweeping arc. One of my preferred combos was the light-heavy, which avoids those slower heavy attacks while still reaching that really strong finisher. Then the heavy light, which is great for kicking off combat from somewhat of a distance as an enemy is approaching. One of the Smoldering Mace's upgradable special abilities is the Foundry Stone, which temporarily lights the end of the mace aflame, allowing for your attacks to inflict fire damage for a time at the cost of 2 ticks of resolve. The other upgrade is the Awakened Stone, which slams the mace into the ground, doing 2 pulses of a big fire area of effect attack. This also takes 2 resolve, and you seem to be invulnerable during the long startup animation, which applies to most all of these. If you want to find the Smoldering Mace and its associated upgrades, you'll need to seek out the entrance to the temple grounds, and it will be awaiting you at the start, but you will need to battle a mini-boss for the right to wield it. The Smoldering Mace is a really great all-around weapon thanks to its long reach, its multi-enemy hitting proficiency, fairly quick light attacks, and its stamina consumption that is not as demanding as you would think for such a large weapon. This is the perfect thing to use for group fights, lending itself well to players who like to jump into piles of enemies and flail away at them. There's not too many downsides to the Smoldering Mace outside of its really slow heavy attacks, which makes it a super solid choice. Next up, the powerhouse Martyr's Blade. Looking at its core moveset, specifically the last 2 hits of its light attacks are really good because of how fast they come out. The heavy attacks are super slow, but will often send enemies flying if you manage to land them. The dash attack has somewhat of a slower startup, but its lunging long reach more than makes up for that. One of my favorite combos was the light-heavy light, which is really strong and decently quick. And then to catch incoming targets, the heavy light is really good because of how fast the last 2 hits come out after that initial heavy attack. One of the special abilities for the Martyr's Blade is Petrified Winter Glass, which will temporarily coat the blade in ice damage, costing 2 resolve. The other is Radiant Winter Glass, which costs 2 resolve as well, plummeting the blade into the ground to do a big ice AoE, which allows for follow-ups while the enemies remain frozen. If you want to acquire the Martyr's Blade and get its icy upgrades, you will need to seek out the Abandoned Chamber, and it will be awaiting you in there. Overall, the Martyr's Blade is the strongest single-hitting weapon in the game, but with the big downside of how much stamina it uses up, and having to rely more often on your Harden ability to cover some of those longer animations. However, its combination of wide-arcing sweeps, quick poking light attack finishers, and heavy strikes that often send your victims flying makes for a really great crowd control and massively destructive weapon choice. Next, the quick-hitting Hammer and Chisel. Looking at its moveset, the light attack string is really fast and lunges you slightly forward with each strike. The heavy string has a pretty slow startup with its first hit, but does have that really satisfying slam attack. The dash attack sends you leaping forward, which is good from a distance, but can also get you into trouble if not spaced correctly. One of my preferred combos is the light-heavy light. Then the light-heavy is one of the quickest and strongest ways to get to that slam finisher. One of the special abilities for the Hammer and Chisel is the Perfume Sensor, which costs 2 resolve and sends out a flurry of blades in the area around you. The other is the Foul Sensor, which is a ranged attack that inflicts poison degen, or if it's used on a weaker enemy, can outright kill them. If you want to get the hammer and chisel and the upgrades for it, you'll need to find the Eternal Narthex and they'll be awaiting you inside. Overall, the hammer and chisel is the go-to weapon for quick burst DPS and can even naturally inflict poison damage once it's upgraded. It doesn't have the best side angle hits, but does have decent straight on reach since most of its attacks naturally send you forward. The AoE special attack is somewhat lacking compared to the similar attacks from the last two weapons, but that still doesn't take away much from this thanks to its low stamina consuming fast attacks. Next, the weapon you start with, the Hallowed Sword. The moveset of the Hallowed Sword has wide sweeping light attacks with a vertical finisher, and a heavy attack string that has a really long reaching opener and a quick final hit to close it out. One of my favorite combos is the light light heavy, which avoids that last slower light attack ender, doing the superior heavy attack finish instead. Then the heavy light heavy, which is a really hard hitting sequence that avoids that slower middle attack from the heavy string. One of the special abilities for the Hallowed Sword is the Mechanical Spike, which costs 2 resolve and does one huge hit that can knock enemies back. Then you have the somewhat similar Molten Spike, which also consumes 2 resolve, doing a strike that will set the target ablaze. Overall, the Hallowed Sword is a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none weapon type that might not excel in any one area, but it is solid in damage, stamina consumption, and has a decent wide and long-hitting reach if you pick the right attacks for that moment. This is probably one of the easier weapons to master, but still can be a strong tool to get you through to the late game. As a quick bonus, the ranged weapon you can get, the Ballistazooka, aka the Boomstick. The Ballistazooka tools can be purchased for 8,000 tar from Vlas the vendor, which need to be socketed onto your weapon, and it uses somewhat hard to come by bolts to fire. This is not necessarily a weapon type you can choose to main, however, the Ballistazooka can be devastating from a range, acting pretty much like a medieval rocket launcher, which is a ridiculous but cool thing to lug around on your back. And with that, those were all of the weapon types in Mortal Shell. Hopefully one of them stood out to you, and let me know if this breakdown helped you out at all. I have a few other good videos on Mortal Shell, like my advanced combat guide and my full review of the game, so check those out on the channel if you want some more useful stuff. As always, this has been Alex from Boomstick Gaming, and thanks for watching.